and welcome back to Immigration Ain't Easy. I am Mo Goldman, and I am honored today to have two guests with me, two lawyers named Marc Vanderhout and Johnny Sinodis. And just to give a brief introduction, Marc is the founding member of Vanderhout LLP. He founded his office originally in 1980 after he worked for 2 years as a newly minted attorney at a Model Cities funded immigration nonprofit. And for the past 45 years, Marc has been representing numerous individuals, families, corporations, across the United States and the world. He has been an adjunct professor at UC College of Law, previously known as Hastings College of Law. Is that correct, Marc?
That's right.
And then also at UC Berkeley School of Law. And Marc has been a tremendous influence on so many lawyers, including myself. You'll hear his laugh at some point. There it is.
I'll try not.
It's contagious. When Marc laughs, everyone smiles and laughs. And Marc has received numerous honors for his advocacy. In fact, I'm not going to read any of them because you can go on his website and there's like 8,000 of them on there. He has been the national president previously of the National Lawyers Guild, and has been on the National Lawyers Guild governing board for nearly 4 decades. And he's also been counsel on numerous critical cases in the Ninth Circuit, the Northern District of California, the Board of Immigration Appeals, Supreme Court, you name it. And so thank you for joining me, Marc.
My pleasure.
Johnny, on the other hand, I don't know if he has a contagious laugh. We'll find out.
He does.
Johnny's a graduate of the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. He's a partner at Vanderhout LLP and has worked with the firm since August 2019. He focuses his practice on removal defense, appeals, federal court litigation, and also the immigration consequences of criminal convictions. He is co-counsel in a case called Rosario v. USCIS, which is a nationwide class action, which would require USCIS to adjudicate asylum applicants' initial applications for employment authorization. There's a little more details there, but I won't go into that yet. And he's an executive board member for the National Lawyers Guild San Francisco chapter. And Johnny has quickly become a national recognized expert on immigration removal defense. And so I just want to, and thank you for joining me, Johnny.
Thank you for having me.
So Johnny,
I'll correct one small thing, just for the record. My 4 decades on the board have been with the National Immigration Project of the Guild, not the National Organization
Lawyers Guild.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Johnny, you graduated law school in 2011, right?
Yes, sir.
And at that time, was going into immigration law on your radar? What got you into this?
Oh, definitely. By then, I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to do. I would say my interest in immigration started when I was pretty young. My mom is from Madrid, and my grandma, great-grandma, they were also from Madrid. So the idea of people being from a different country, speaking Spanish, was like basic. It wasn't until I got older when I realized that was not necessarily the norm. I was born in Fresno, but grew up in Phoenix, and I'd say most of the people I went to school with were white kids. And my first book report or like newspaper article report that I had to do was the idea was given to me by my mom. It was an article about a Mexican family who got stuck in the desert and needed to be rescued because they got lost. And I was, I think, in fourth grade, third or fourth grade then, and it just like shocked me. The idea that you would have to um, take such a dangerous path to come into the United States for a better life had never been anything that was on my radar until I read that article. And from there, it was sort of like a natural progression. I went to a Jesuit high school that taught liberation theology, was super liberal. And we had to do, every summer, we had to do an immersion trip. And I did 3 immersion trips to different parts of Mexico. And on one of those trips, we met with people in Nogales, in Altar, and we talked to them about their journey from southern Mexico up to where they were in Nogales or Altar and what their plans were, which was to cross the border and then go into the United States. Um, so from there, once I went to law school, I knew that I wanted to do something immigration wise, and it was solidified once I took the asylum law course. So that's how I got into immigration.
Just following up on that, what was the most shocking thing that you came to the realization with when you were going on these trips to Mexico, as far as what you saw or heard?
I would say like the abject poverty that you saw, especially along the border, and the risks that people were forced to take in order to provide not only for themselves but for their family as well. That was a real eye opener. I also, up until fourth or fifth grade, like thought immigration was something easy because there was nothing that dramatic about how my mom and grandma and great grandma immigrated here. But then I quickly realized that's not actually how it works for most of the people in the immigration system.
Gotcha. And Mark, what what was your motivation? Was there anything growing up that got you interested in working with immigrants?
So actually, I got into immigration law, I'd say by a fluke, to be quite honest. In law school, I had mostly done uh, criminal defense at a sort of a alternative public defenders type office, and my first summer and then next year of law school, I worked for the United Farm Workers Union in Salinas, and it was actually during the first elections under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act that was new in 1975, and so I thought that I would either continue working with the UFW or do criminal defense. And what happened was I decided I needed to improve my Spanish, and so after the bar in California, you have about 4 months basically between the time you take the bar and go to and find out the results. So I went to Guatemala and I studied Spanish there intensively for a few months, and I put out the word through my National Lawyers Guild network and connections and said, "Hey, I'm going off to Guatemala for a few months, and when I come back, I'm going to need to look for a job. I want to do something progressive, and I want to use my Spanish." And that was my basic, confine. Um, and but thought I'd end up in criminal defense or labor law. And then a friend of mine who was at law school and was a couple of years ahead of me was leaving a job at what you mentioned, the International Institute in Redwood City, and he called me up and said, "Hey, I'm going back uh, east." In those days, and you're going to go work in the factories and make the revolution and that sort of thing. Come take my place as an immigration lawyer in this entity. And I said, I know nothing about immigration law. I had taken one course. I had, it was an interesting course, but it was not on my radar screen. And he said, "Don't worry about it. There's a executive director is a essentially a paralegal or notary, and he knows a lot about immigration law. And we have a lawyer 30 miles away in another sub office. And if you have any questions, you can call him, and there's a good community. And I said, okay, what the heck? So I had no intention of. I mean, it was not on my radar at all, and it was total fluke. And it was the luckiest phone call I've ever had because I've loved it ever since. So it was fortuitous but not planned.
So just, I mean, in 1980, when you hung your shingle, not to age you so much, but I was 6 years
Okay.
old, and Johnny was not alive, I'm assuming.
No, I was not.
um, and can you, I mean, the name of this podcast is Immigration Ain't Easy, and it's named that because obviously. Um, in that time, was immigration, was it like a lot easier? Like, describe how the process has either evolved or devolved since you first got into practicing immigration law.
Well, it sort of depends if you want to count the last 6 months, basically.
All right, up to January of 2025.
Right, right.
Well, I mean, stepping back then, like, was the forms pretty rudimentary? I mean, now we've got a 20-page,
Yeah.
green card application.
It was very, very different in those days. Even as a beginning lawyer, yeah, at first I was just doing, immigrant visa petitions and things like that, and citizenship, and then I was doing a fair bit of initial deportation defense because I was at a nonprofit. There was very few nonprofit immigration lawyers. Certainly, there were very few immigration lawyers, to be quite honest, and so I got a lot of experience going into court, doing what they called master calendar hearings, like arraignment hearings for people. There were like two other lawyers and nonprofits, or three or four in the Bay Area total, I think, who had been in practice a couple of years before me, and I learned from them. There were also a lot of and the other thing though, the issue of you could actually talk in those days to immigration officials. I mean, I had a very good relationship to what's called the district director of it was INS at the time, immigration. I would go into his office. He would talk a lot. I mean, we didn't agree, and periodically I would sue him, but we had a open relationship. And now you can't talk to anybody, and so it's very, very different. But if you don't count the last 6 months or so, um, which has been a drastic change, which we will get into, I'm sure. But the early years, we learned from each other. There weren't a huge number of immigration lawyers. I mean, the guild at that time, a woman who became an immigration judge in San Francisco, Pauli Weber, uh, uh, started the guild's immigration committee in San Francisco, and we would just meet, once a week or once every 2 weeks, about 10 or 12 or 15 people who were starting out in practice relatively, and learn from each other, strategize, talk. That's how we learned, immigration law, really. And so, um, but there were also, pretty soon after I got into practice, I got involved in some major lawsuits. I had been active politically in the National Lawyers Guild. I had started doing um, uh, Central America defense work, in terms of Central America advocacy work, trying to fight U.S. intervention in El Salvador and Guatemala, etc. And so I came to actually um, the asylum related immigration stuff through the more the political work on fighting U.S. intervention in Central America than I did through immigration initially. Um, and we can talk about you mentioned the ABC case. I'll mention that in a little bit, but probably my first big case was I'd been in practice a year, and there was the Iranian hostage situation in 1979 in Iran, and they took repercussions against Iranian students in the United States who had nothing to do with taking the hostages, and they wanted to try to deport all the Iranian students. Um, Fast forward, that's what we're doing to Palestinians now, of course. But so we ended up suing the, it was the Carter administration at that time. And I worked with Peter Shea, who was a longtime immigrant advocate, great litigator. And he was a couple years ahead of me, and I learned under him. Um, and a few other people, and that's how you learned immigration law in those days, was from your fellow immigration attorneys, bottom line.
And Johnny, when you got out of law school, like where did you start off? Like, what was your first opportunity to do immigration work?
When I was in law school, I was part of the Immigration Law and Policy Clinic at ASU, and we did mainly SIJS petitions, so special immigrant juvenile status petitions for kids who either become ward of the state or are placed with a guardian because of abuse, abandonment, or neglect by their biological parents. Um, and I also worked at the immigration court for a semester as an extern in Phoenix. I interacted most with Judge Hollis, who is since retired, but at the time, Judge Firks was at Phoenix Immigration Court, and so is Judge Richardson. So those are, if you practiced in Phoenix, those three individuals. They were definitely, their reputation preceded them for many different reasons. And before I graduated, they said a woman named Delia Salvatierra is looking for an associate attorney out of school. You should apply to work with her. And so I did, and fortunately, she hired me before I finished my last semester, and I worked with her until October 2018. So over 7 years. And when I came out of school, it was at the height of Joe Arpaio and all the ridiculous things that Maricopa County was doing, not just the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, but the Maricopa County Attorney's Office as well. And so, things were active. Like it was real hot in Phoenix, and in Maricopa County. There are saturation patrols, worksite enforcement raids, and uh, you know, you had to have both feet in when I started, and fortunately, Delia certainly did. Um, and and so yeah, I mean, she was my primary mentor until I moved from Phoenix to Madrid in 2018. And when I was with Delia, not only did we do immigration work, but um, we were also forced to begin litigating criminal cases um, because we came to find out as a result of a FOIA request that ICE in Phoenix and Eloy was teaching the Maricopa County Attorney's Office how to offer plea agreements that would solidify the deportation of a non-citizen once they were done with their criminal proceedings. And at the time, like, you had dozens of people arrested every week during these worksite enforcement raids, and they would just plea them out to like forgery. So they were screwed once they got to immigration court. And so, yeah, we took on a lot of criminal cases at the time, litigated against the raids, um, and I think I got to do a lot of different things that I otherwise had not sort of envisioned when I graduated law school, because the criminal side of the practice was essential, but it wasn't necessarily where my mind was focused when I graduated.
And that is sort of how the term crimmigration came uh, to birth, the intersection of criminal and immigration law.
That's right. Yeah.
And let me ask you, did you spend much time in the detention facilities in Florence and Eloy during that time?
Spent a lot of time in Florence and Eloy. Spent a lot of time at the Maricopa County jails. Spent some time in the Arizona State prisons as well. And you know, detention work is not fun, especially when you're in a place like Eloy, where the the denial rates are sky high. But it's critical that people do that work because I think that is where the most need is, and it teaches you to litigate on your feet. You come to understand very quickly that the immigration system is not set up fairly. You are adversarial to not only ICE but the immigration judge. And I think what most people don't understand is that an immigration judge is an employee of Department of Justice. They are not a judge in a district court or a judge in a superior court. And often, immigration judges were ICE attorneys who practiced at the detention facility where they go on to be a judge. And so you really need to recalibrate how it is that you approach a case, how you advise a client, and how to set expectations and really think outside the box. Because at least in 2011, 2012, 2013 in Arizona, you needed to win the case in criminal court if your client was being arrested by Maricopa County Sheriff's Department, or any other law enforcement agency in Maricopa County. Once you get to immigration court, if your client has a conviction, the judge just takes the conviction at face value. It doesn't matter anything else that happened. If they have a certain type of conviction, they could have lived in the US 30 years, they might have 10 kids, they might have a husband or a wife or a partner with cancer. That's all for nothing if their conviction precludes them from immigration relief.
I I think, and I've always analogized immigration law in a sports context to immigration lawyers are like batters in baseball. I know Mark's a San Francisco big Giants fan here, but I think about like if we can win 25% of our cases, we're probably successful. You're batting a 250 batting average. I mean, it's hard in immigration court because the odds are stacked against your clients and heavily stacked.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
just to expand on that point, things are terrible when you feel as though you have a much better chance of success in criminal court. If you know anything about the criminal legal system, it's that most people get convicted if they're charged with a crime. But due process there it resembles more what you're taught in school than the due process, quote unquote, you receive in immigration court.
And this has been going on for as long as we've had restrictions on immigration laws or on immigrants in general, which kind of takes me back to Mark. I mean, you've seen the discrimination. I mean, it seems like the theme that comes throughout a lot of the litigation, the high impact litigation you've been involved with is discriminatory in nature, and violations of due process. And we can go back. I just wanted to kind of go through a few of the major cases you've worked on, like the ABC v. Thornburg case that involved it was a nationwide class action that challenged the discrimination by our government in the adjudication of asylum cases based off of country of origin, but ultimately your litigation resulted in a settlement. I think it was in the mid 90s, correct? That would allow 500,000 Central Americans to try and do what is called de novo, new applications because of the discrimination that went on, and it also resulted in the creation of temporary protected status and carescent, right? Talk a little bit about that litigation. Like, how did you get involved, and a little bit of the chronology of that.
Sure. So the way I got involved actually was similar to what I was talking about. How I came to immigration law really from the political perspective and from my work around fighting U.S. intervention in Central America. Because the ABC case initially was Center for Constitutional Rights in New York approached me uh, about to do a lawsuit and whether I'd be local counsel in a lawsuit that they wanted to bring um, on behalf of the sanctuary movement. And given the Arizona connection here, I'll talk about that because in the early 80s, religious groups, mostly starting out of Tucson and elsewhere in Arizona, but also bringing in some of the San Francisco Bay Area churches, etc., started to talk about doing um, sanctuary for Central America refugees because the United States government was denying all the asylum claims, and they were doing that because they didn't want to make their people they were supporting in those dictatorships, El Salvador and Guatemala, look bad, and so they were denying in those days. They were denying uh, almost all the cases, 99% of Guatemalan cases, 97% of Salvadoran cases. And the religious uh, leaders from the community, John Fife from Arizona was one of the, among the initial people in it, um, decided that they had a religious obligation to protect people's lives and the refugees who our government was, just abandoning responsibility for um, and denying all their cases. So there was a lawsuit that was going to, and they had started to prosecute the sanctuary workers. A group in Stacy Merck and Lee Elder in Texas were the first ones that were prosecuted, and then people in Arizona. And so we joined. So I joined the lawsuit, but I said, in addition to um, having the main part of the case be uh, stopping the prosecution of sanctuary workers on First Amendment free exercise of religion grounds, I wanted to make sure we would bring in a separate claim for discrimination in the Salvadoran and Guatemalan asylum case. So that's how the asylum part actually of the ABC case started, and um, and there was rampant discrimination because, as I said, they were denying almost all those cases, but they were granting 87% of Nicaraguan cases at the same time. Why? Because we were opposed to the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and wanted to make them look bad, and so they would do that. And the other aspect of it was um, on a lawsuit that I had filed, that Center for Constitutional Rights had filed, and I joined about a year or two before on challenging U.S. intervention in Central America. It was under challenging sending military aid to El Salvador, and under law at that time, you could not send military aid to a country that was engaged in systematic and gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. It was against the law. But what the United States was doing was they would continue to want to send the military aid, and so they sent the refugees back. And their claim was that there was no valid claim when there really was. So eventually, to fast forward, the sanctuary part of the case got uh, thrown out, and we were not able to win on that issue to stop the prosecution. But the asylum part survived what the government claimed was political question doctrine. They basically argued in court that um, the right to adjudicate the cases however they want is a political question, which is I'm putting that in quotes, um, putting which is the courts can't interfere with, and luckily we had a very brave, I would say, district court judge, Judge Peckham, who resisted the Reagan administration's, this was all under the Reagan administration, by the way, arguments, and said, no, there's a legitimate claim here. And so we survived. It was called a motion to dismiss. We went in and started discovery, and it was clear that there was going to be, I mean, this just took 5 years, by the way. I'm fast forwarding. It was clear we were going to get all sorts of very, very revealing and harmful to the government's perspective memorandum about, hey, we gotta deny all these cases because we're trying to support the government of El Salvador, and etc. Yeah, we're trying to support them. Yeah, um, yeah. So eventually, um, uh, I got a phone call from um, an individual who's very well known in the immigration lawyers community, Bob Jusium, uh, from New York. He called me from an airplane. In those days, it was 1990, and there was those phones at the back of the plane that you could
And the
try
seats.
to talk to. Barely hear him. And he goes, "Mark, it's Bob here. Bill Cook wants to um, talk to you." He was the general counsel um, of INS at the time. He said, "Wants to talk settlement, but you have to call him." I did, and we spent about a year in settlement discussions, and eventually, as you said, about a half a million. They had to redo every single denied case that they had adjudicated since the Refugee Act was passed in 1980. So between 1980 and 1990, they had to redo every single denial. Eventually, about a half a million people um, were able to regularize or qualified under the ABC settlement, and eventually their uh, cases were resolved over the next many years through temporary protected status. Eventually, a lot of them, but I still have people uh, even today coming up to me at events and go, "I want to introduce myself. I'm here because you saved my parents here, and they've told the story about the ABC case." And so it's been quite a it's still been a remarkable case.
It is a beautiful thing to have people, you know, show their appreciation for what
Yeah.
you do. Um, and I think, I mean, I'll ask you, Johnny.
Oh, can
Um,
I just say one thing before I
yeah,
interrupt?
go ahead.
This was not a solo effort by any means.
Oh,
I want
yeah.
to be clear. Besides CCR at the beginning of the case, and then they ended up after a few years saying, "Look, we're not the immigration experts, can do it." So that I got um, Lucas Gutentag from the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, and I went out to a San Francisco uh, law firm, a corporate law firm that does a lot of pro bono work, Morrison and Forster. They joined the case, and with that, and other individuals, Patty Blum. There's a whole list of people. So I just want to say this was not me alone. In all these cases, these are always group efforts. You co-counsel with people you can work with, and it's always important to do that. You can never do that alone.
Well, I was going to ask you, Johnny, is do you find that one of the biggest motivators for you is to see the success, the fruits of your labor?
Definitely, that's one of them for sure. Um, and having had the opportunity to work with Marc now for 6 years, it's also opened my eyes to the possibilities of bringing change and benefit to not just one person or one family or a few families, but people nationwide. I just want to flag 500,000 people is a severe undercount. ABC, if you count the people who have benefited as a result of that settlement, that litigation, it's in the millions. Um, and so it did lead to the creation of the TPS statutes that we have. And so I think Mark was being a bit modest there in terms of how important that case was. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but weren't you the person that said, well, why can't we sue immigration judges? I mean, they're just agency folk at the end of the day. They're not actual judges. We need to like disabuse ourselves of the thought that we can't take action against them for this illegality.
Yeah, I had a lot of chutzpah in those days, and maybe still do. But yeah, I did say that. I mean, people, when I brought that to the team, because we were just suing the Immigration Service for their affirmative applications, but the judges were denying all the cases also. Um, and so I said we should sue the judges too. And people said, "How can you sue a judge?" And exactly what Johnny said. I just said, "Hey, these are all just administrative agency employees, and we can definitely sue them." And that was a key part to the case. So that was my chutzpah. Correct.
So we talk about due process and freedoms and different ideologies, and I there's so much introspection that's going on, especially right now in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But leading up to where we are today, I look back at some of the cases that have gone through that involved protesters or people who are pro-Palestinian. Okay, and we can go back decades. In fact, Mark, you were involved in the Reno versus American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee case that went to the Supreme Court. And in that case, the court upheld and broadly interpreted a federal statute that severely restricted the rights of alien residents to challenge their deportation orders in court, even in cases when the defendants claim a violation of their constitutional rights. And if I'm not mistaken, in that case, the government had declared the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine an international terrorist organization. And going all the way back to 1987, the INS ordered the deportation of 8 residents who were members of this organization, even though they had never been convicted of a crime. Is that a good kind of assessment of what happened there?
Almost. I'll explain.
Okay. You explain it in a little more detail.
Well, the key difference is that they were not members of the PFLP. And the government alleged they were supporters of the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine. And that's an important distinction because besides the jurisdictional issue, which we can talk about later, got resolved against us at the Supreme Court, the government's position was that, well, first of all, let me back up. Well, the government's position was that even people who are not members of an organization, but if they provide material, what they call material support, which is money, let's say, or food or whatever, to a quote unquote terrorist organization, then you can be deported. But you got to understand the background of this. Initially, when they were charged, these were 8 individuals, 7 Palestinians and 1 Kenyan wife of one of the Palestinians. 2 were permanent residents and 6 were on various non-immigrant visas. They initially were charged under the old 1952 McCarran-Walter Act with being members of or associated with in any way an organization that supports the economic and international doctrines of world communism. That was the initial charge. And we went to federal court and got that statute finally declared unconstitutional. It had been on the books since 1952. We got it declared unconstitutional in district court and at the Court of Appeals. As a result of that, um, the government changed tact and they got Congress to enact what is essentially the laws, the essence of the laws in the books today, which is that you can be deportable if for providing material support to a quote terrorist organization. Initially, terrorist organization wasn't defined; it subsequently was. Um, but the essence of our case was that you should be able to. They never were accused of giving money to the PFLP or anything like that. They were accused of um, giving money or other support like food or medicines, etc., to uh, nonprofit organizations. United Nations recognized nonprofit organizations, NGOs, that the government claimed were connected to um, military organizations. The Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine has many of the organizations in those days, and still um, in Palestine issues and in others have they were basically what people looked to for their lives. They were political organizations and they were military organizations. And our argument was you could give money and support to the legal parts of those organizations that were, providing education, providing schools, providing hospitals, etc.
Good
And that,
benefits.
yeah, that's what the money went to. But ultimately, um, in another case, the Holy Land Foundation case, with my co-counsel in the LAA case, one of my co-counsel, David Cole, um, and it was called the Los Angeles Eight because of the eight individuals. Um, they ruled that no, you cannot give money or medicine or food to an organization that also has a military wing to it. And so that's the state of the law now. We won in district court uh, on we had people had a First Amendment right to do what they were doing, political support, um, and that the government was selectively prosecuting them for um, for what they were doing because they didn't like the PFLP or any of the PLO organizations, but that the government was not going after people who gave money to uh, the Mujahideen and other many other organizations throughout the world where the United States government was supporting the military of those organizations. So it was fine to give money to the Contras in Nicaragua. It was fine to give money to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, etc., because we were supporting those military entities. Um, but we lost at the Supreme Court, as you said, on selective prosecution grounds. We're facing that now in many cases where ADC is cited back to us on jurisdiction, etc. But it was an important political case. We ended up winning ultimately in back in immigration court, ironically, and where we were able to prove that they had done nothing illegal under the laws. And so, 20 years after the case started, we finally settled the case, and they're all in this country, and it was a tremendous victory. But it was a long struggle. And when I first took on the case, um, um, I was like questioned a lot by a lot of my, uh, I would say several of my immigration lawyer friends who were Jewish and saying, how could you as a Jew do this? And I said, it's crucial. We got to stand up, for the law. We got to stand up for people who are asserting their rights. And it's important for Jewish lawyers also to do that. And I've always believed that and continue to do so even in the cases I'm doing today.
And yeah, and we're seeing that that same sort of questioning occurring these days, quite considerable amount. And we live in these times where it's like people dig their heels in and they forget that, you know, we have to defend the Constitution. We have to defend people's rights. You may or may not agree with the ideologies, but we should stand up for people's freedoms of assembly and speech, um,
And fighting
and
the hypocrisy, because
hypocrisy.
back then and even today, what the government picks and chooses what it decides to go after, and the same exact actions could be engaged in by other people, but those people are supporting the entities that whatever government's in place at that time, whether it's Trump or even under Biden, or any of the others, where the United States government is supporting those governments, and it's okay to provide the material support. If we're not supporting them, it's not. So it's totally hypocritical.
So now we move to March of 2025, and on March 8th, Mahmoud Khalil was arrested in New York City, and sent to the LaSalle detention facility in Louisiana. Johnny, how did your firm get involved with this case?
Well, we obviously we heard about it on Sunday, March 9th, on the news. And I think it wasn't before that day ended that folks started reaching out. I think it was ultimately, Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Bahar Azmi, the legal director from Center for Constitutional Rights, that got in touch with Mark, and said, "Look, this individual is going to need legal help. We're wondering if you will take on the immigration case," and that's how it began. There was a series of meetings that occurred in the next several days, and then I was out of the office for about a week getting married. The only legal talk I had during that week actually was about Mahmoud's case and what we needed to do and getting involved and etc. Um,
Just to, so did you guys become the lead counsel, or are you the lead counsel on the immigration case?
yeah, we are. We're the lead counsel on the immigration case, and we're co-counsel in the district court proceedings as well, and also at the Third Circuit.
And just for a little bit of background, he was born in 95 to Palestinian parents in a refugee camp in Syria. He eventually immigrated to the U.S. and became a permanent resident of the United States. His wife is a U.S. citizen, if I'm not mistaken, and they had a
And his
newborn
son.
baby. Yeah, that was born while he was in LaSalle.
That's correct. Yeah.
He had been involved as a negotiator and spokesperson for the pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University. And he was never arrested during any of those protests or accused of participating in any sort of anti-Semitic behavior. So, I mean, as far as I understand,
And
and who
that's
defines
correct.
that? Yeah. um, so what was your first move once ICE detained him and you took on the case? Like how did you decide to strategize on this? Because they were holding him under the U.S. foreign policy, that his actions were adverse to our foreign policy.
Yeah, so there's a provision in the Immigration Nationality Act that had only been used a handful of times before this year. And if you read the statute, it refers to another statute. But the long and short of it is, the Immigration Nationality Act purports to give the U.S. government the ability to deport someone for free speech, for activity that is lawful, if the Secretary of State determines that their presence is adverse to a compelling foreign policy interest. And so, there are a number of problems with the way the statute is written, and we're seeing how those problems can be extrapolated and applied against people like Mahmoud and several others. Um, the government from the get-go has been explicit that he was never charged with, arrested for, accused of any crime. But they just don't like his point of view. I mean, plain and simple. And he fell in the sights of Department of Homeland Security and Department of State and Department of Justice because there were right-wing groups, Betar USA and Canary Mission, who targeted him and doxed him precisely because he is Palestinian, and he was critical of the Israeli government, like many people are, like I myself am. And
So
as
am
you
I.
noted, yeah,
Guilty as charged.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, as you correctly noted, he was tapped as a negotiator by professors at Columbia to serve as the intermediary between the campus administrators and everyone involved in campus protests. So not only Palestinian groups, but like the dance club, the music club, anyone who was participating in the student encampment, he was serving as the negotiator between the administration and the students. Um, Never been alleged to have engaged in anti-Semitism by anyone who's objective and credible. The New York Post has said a lot of bullshit that is not backed up by any fact. And some of the closest colleagues he had at Columbia and professors are Jewish and have been very vocal since the beginning that he is not an anti-Semite. But as Marc said, we have an administration right now that thinks it's politically advantageous to use the very real problem of anti-Semitism to target people who are not the problem. And this is a much broader conversation about the U.S. ties to Israel, etc. But Mahmoud Khalil is not an example of the type of individual who should be at risk of deportation. His whole life has been committed to standing up for human rights, beginning when he was a child in Syria, when he fled to Lebanon, and then when he came to the United States. Part of the reason Columbia gave him a scholarship is because of his work as a human rights activist. And so for less than 2 years later, for him to be at risk of being deported for doing the same thing he's done his entire life is just, in my view, the height of stupidity.
Yeah. And Mo, I would just add at the beginning, people reached out to us, Bahar being one of them, and saying, people think your office should take this case. Would you be willing to? And I said, well, I want to talk to Mahmoud and his wife. And I talked to them, and they were the sweetest people. He is so nice, and both of them very, very wonderful people, very soft spoken. Whenever I say to him, when he was in custody, all those, first few months, hey, how you doing, Mahmoud? He goes, I'm doing fine, Marc. How are you doing? And it's that sort of thing. And just, everything that's been said about him in the, New York Post and by the Trump administration is, completely untrue. And so, I spoke to Johnny about it. We decided let's let's do it. I was a little hesitant at first because, like I said, when I took on the last big,
The last one.
the last Palestinian case, it lasted 20 years, and I'm 77, so I wasn't ready to do another more. But
Well, you'll live till you're 97 now for this case. You'll have to live until you see the end of this case.
I got Johnny;
I,
he'll take it over.
I mean, on that piece, speaking of strategy, because Marc had litigated the LA8 case so well and for so long, we knew that we would have to file a bunch of procedural motions in immigration court um, to try to get some information to explain why it is that they went after Mahmoud, went into the decision making. But we also knew that the immigration judge was likely to find that discovery is not permissible in immigration court. these constitutional claims you're bringing up cannot be adjudicated by me because, immigration judges and the Board of Immigration Appeals, they can't rule on the constitutionality of the laws they administer. And it would be critical to get decisions on those motions, and oral findings as well during our hearings so that we could, underscore why the district judge in federal district court in New Jersey had jurisdiction to deal with the broader challenge, which is, whether Rubio's determination is vague, whether you can actually deport someone for protected speech, etc. Um, you know, this could be hours long conversation, but as you know, Mo, the Immigration Nationality Act has all these jurisdiction stripping provisions that are supposed to keep claims out of district court and sort of funnel things up through the immigration process. But the reality is, this type of case can't be litigated. Some parts of it can't be litigated effectively in immigration court, just given the limited powers that an immigration judge actually has.
The case is in New York City now at Federal Plaza or in Jersey. Where is
It,
it?
it's
Which
in Yeah, so great question. It's in New Jersey right now. Initially, when Mahmoud was arrested, the ICE detainee locator said that he was in New York at 26 Federal Plaza, and no ICE officials were responding to the attorneys who, jumped into gear late that night to file a habeas petition. And so when they filed the habeas petition in New York, Mahmoud was actually in New Jersey. The case ended up therefore getting transferred to New York to New Jersey because that's where he physically was, and the habeas statute, uh, for the most part, requires that you file in district court where the person is physically at the time of submission. So, we're in district court in New Jersey, and there's also an appeal pending at the Third Circuit right now.
What's the basis of that appeal at the Third Circuit?
The government has appealed two decisions. The district judge's decision to release Mahmoud on bail. The government never set forth any evidence to show he was a danger or a flight risk. And because immigration custody is civil, the only two interests are to protect against danger or prevent flight risk. And he's neither of those things, so he was granted bail. And then the other order that's been appealed is sort of a clarification that the district judge had to issue after he had granted our motion for a preliminary injunction. So just to back up, in June, the court granted our motion for preliminary injunction and found that we were likely to succeed on the merits of our claim that Rubio's determination and the foreign policy grounds application against Mahmoud is unlawful. It's unconstitutional. Um, and so, rather than abide by that ruling and quit prosecuting and trying to deport Mahmoud under the foreign policy ground, the immigration judge and ICE acted as though that ruling never occurred. So we had to go back to the district judge to say, hey, they've ordered Mahmoud's removal after you granted our preliminary injunction. So we need you to clarify what steps is the judge and ICE supposed to take in removal proceedings. And the district judge issued a clarifying order explaining you need to do X, Y, Z. The government has appealed that to the Third Circuit. And so both orders are consolidated right now. We're in the middle of briefing. We just filed our opposition on Wednesday, and the government's reply is due soon, and we're going to have oral argument in October.
If you guys allow me maybe about 10 more minutes, would that be okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what do you, without divulging any of your, legal strategy, what do you foresee as far as the future of this case? Like, where do you think it's going to be headed? And this is for either of you.
I mean, I think this is headed to the Supreme Court. The government has made this the poster case for this issue that they're trying to put forward. There's three or four other Palestinian activists, or I'm sorry, activists on this Palestinian issue, not all Palestinians, who have been also arrested and charged. But they've made Mahmoud's case the prime one. They've gone out of their way to, put things out in the, what in the New York Post, as Johnny mentioned, or just their statements about him. They're clearly flagging him. They also uh, added this ridiculous charge that he uh, misstated things on his application for residency that were completely bogus. Um, and um, and so they are, including one of the charges is that he was a member of this group that instead of the negotiator between the faculty um, and the student protesters, the Columbia University, uh, I think it's anti-apartheid and divestment, I think it's called, um, group. Um, but they claimed he was a member of that and he didn't list it on his application for residency, but his application was residency was submitted months before the encampment even occurred. So it's absurd, but the immigration judge has upheld that because she's wired. She's a part of the she's just following what the White House is ordering her to do. Quite honestly, and um, um, so we're in a situation where they've made this the poster child. We have won already so far in district court. There'll be more actions in district court, um, and but I think this is headed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is as political as it's ever been, and is as biased as it's ever been, and so
Mhm.
that's the political reality of what we're dealing with.
There's a lot of I think Johnny had noted this earlier. Weaponization of the idea that if you're not in line with this government's core beliefs on Israel, and maybe Mark mentioned it, you, they're weaponizing anti Semitism as a basis and warping what truly should be viewed as anti Semitism to attack people who dissent. Um, and we see that even within our own field of lawyers, where, you know, we're having, I mean, it's happening all over the country where there's these divides that are building because, you have people who look at what's happening over there and calling it out for what we truly believe is what's happening to the Gazans and the Palestinians. Um,
Yep.
Mark has. Were you raised Jewish?
I was, yep. And so I have, been, like I mentioned with the LAA case, criticized at the beginning of this case. Um, a lot of uh, discussions with Jewish friends who were questioning and saying, hey, he's, a Hamas supporter and all that. How could you possibly represent him? This has all been bullshit that's the United States government has put forward. He's not a Hamas supporter by any means. He's been critical of a lot of what Hamas has done. Um, and so, people are equating, unfortunately, um, criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, and there's should be no and there is no correlation.
They're
Um,
mutually exclusive.
yeah, completely. You could be
Um,
as religious
have
and
you lost friendships because of your defense for not only the eight but also him?
um, no, I haven't lost friendship. I mean, most of my friends are you know
They're the same.
politically, politically in
Yeah,
tune with my views, etc. And so no, I mean I did have some at the very beginning, the first week or two when the government was putting out all this you know completely false information. There were people, how could you do this and that sort of thing? You're supporting Hamas, but but no, that is now, you know, devolved really because it's and also especially with the horrors that are going on in Gaza in particular now. Even many of my uh, friends or relatives or my wife's relatives who might be pro Israel in general and believe in the right of Israel to exist, etc., like that, are like what Israel is doing in Gaza is reprehensible
Wrong.
and can't be
Yeah.
defended. Yeah.
Johnny, the first time I realized you were on this case, I saw you quoted in some publication. Um, have you faced any sort of like personal attacks or hate for representing Khalil? Have you heard from people or?
From people who I know, I have not. Um, I have gotten all sorts of crazy emails and phone calls, both to the office on my office phone, office email, my personal email, and personal phone. So that has happened. But, I'd say similar to Mark, most of the people I surround myself and also most of my family are politically aligned. And, I would say that there were a couple people who expressed some concern initially when we got involved in the Defense for Children International Palestine case. It's a case that we were on with Center for Constitutional Rights. We sued the Biden administration for its complicity in genocide and in Gaza. And I think in January 2024, when Judge White, a district judge in Oakland, who is, you know, I would say probably considered a Reagan Republican. I don't know him that well. My experience is more recent, so I haven't gone back decades with him as a judge. But he found within several months of uh, of what unfolded in Gaza after October 7th to be a plausible case of genocide. And I think once people saw that a district judge who was not this quote unquote radical leftist who had been appointed decades ago, siding with the facts, um, that helped them realize that what we were seeing unfold in Gaza was not just a military response to October 7th, but in fact a genocide.
But I will say that that is all true. But I will say, Mo, and you may know this, that in one of the organizations that we all are a part of, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, there has been a group of I think mostly Jewish lawyers, uh, and by the way, this is not all Jewish lawyers by any means, but a small group who've been very vocal, criticizing people who have spoken out against what's going on in Gaza as being anti-Semitic, and that's really unfortunate. And some of the um, lawyers who are representing people uh, in the immigration bar, besides John and me from the East Coast in particular, who are um, 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 of I would say of different ethnicities are getting a lot of criticism from some Jewish lawyers within ILA, and that is unfortunately. But I think even that's shifting on some of the people's parts who are vocal, as the outrage and what's going on in Gaza is just
Yeah,
clear to the world.
I think you're 100% right. Um, I was curious because I've had this discussion with a few of my colleagues, and in the past 2 weeks, a lawyer for ICE that I know quit. And he told me that he could no longer uphold his oath to the Constitution, working under this administration. Do you, and this again is for either of you or both of you, do you believe that ICE attorneys and the immigration judges that are currently working under this administration can legally uphold their oath to the Constitution and do the jobs they're doing?
I think they certainly can, but at the risk of being fired.
Yeah, 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 and so many have. I mean, if your reader, if your listeners don't know this, there have been so many immigration judges, in particular, fired over the last 2 to 4 or 5 weeks now, um, by the Trump administration. They have singled out, you know, most or many of the what they consider the more liberal judges, and they have essentially fired them and taken the position that these are people who would otherwise have, many of them, been protected by civil service, but based on the Supreme Court's permitting federal workers to be fired by Trump, they're now being just axed on. We have one person in San Francisco who's been a judge for probably about 10 years now or more, who was given about an hour and a half notice and said, "Walk out the door, please." And that's happening to so many of the judges. And it's not entirely, but it is predominantly, uh, what the government considers are the more liberal judges. So it's outrageous what's going on, and they're going to be replaced by Trump appointees, and we're going to see a real change in what the I think in what the immigration judge bench looks like very soon.
I have one more question, and I'll ask each of you this. One of the focuses that I like to use this platform for is for good causes and to promote, charitable causes and nonprofits that might be near and dear to what you guys, like and work for. So, Johnny, is there any sort of like, for people who listen to this podcast, is there a cause that you think people should support? Obviously, there's a lot of them out there, but is there any one in particular, one or two, that you think are ones that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, super biased here, but I'll give to the National Lawyers Guild, especially the chapter that we're on the board for in San Francisco. Historically, has done great work, and we're continuing to do that. But there's National Lawyer Guild chapters throughout the country, and then in your backyard, Mo, the Florence Project. It's a phenomenal organization. That has been targeted, as many other legal service providers to immigrants have been, but they continue to do things that many immigration attorneys either don't have the skills to do or the desire to do. They're in the detention centers. They're making sure that people who are in custody understand their rights, and they're taking part in really great litigation, either handling it themselves or as plaintiffs. So those would be the two, but there's many, many more.
And I'd also add that FERPs, just like many of these organizations, have seen a huge cut in their funding, and have had to let go a lot of folks. And so, yeah. Mark, any in your
Yeah, I'd mention,
mind?
in addition to what Johnny mentioned, which I completely agree with, I'd mention, just so fighting on the Palestine issue in particular. Palestine Legal is a great organization that is uh, fighting to protect the rights of students and workers for not being fired or disciplined at school for supporting or for opposing what is going on in Gaza. And so that's a very important organization. Is doing great work around that. On the immigration front, I would also say the National Immigration Project of the Lawyers Guild, which I was on the board on for many, many years and is doing great work. And also, there's an organization in Boston, but it's a national organization called the National Immigration Litigation Alliance that a former attorney in our office started, Trina Riamolto, and our office set up, Johnny and Zach, my other partners, actually set up um, an uh, fellowship there. Sorry. Uh, under my
The
name.
Mark Vanderhout Fellow.
Mark Litigation Fellowship. They decided they would like me to be able to see that while I'm alive, as opposed to after I'm dead. So, so there's that there also. Any of those would be great.
Well, that's great.
And
Well, yeah.
NYLA has its hand in so many impact litigation cases right now. They, along with NERP, are handling the DVD litigation. They've got a CBP FOIA class action case that we're co-counsel with. I mean, we could go on, but they're phenomenal, and Trina is owed a lot of kudos.
And if they do give to that, yeah, if they could give to the Mark Vander Litigation Fellowship, then we've got recent law graduates who come in every 2 years and take on and do important work for the organization. So we support that, obviously, also.
Well, thank you both. I mean, we ran 30 minutes longer than what I might, well, 15 minutes longer than what I would have expected. But hey, that's what happens when you get three lawyers in a room together.
Yeah, happy to do that with you, Mo. And you run a good program here, and you've always been you and your mom in particular have been great friends for years.
Yeah. Any final words, Johnny, before you go sleep or work or whatever?
I would just say that as grueling as some days are, I think most of us that became attorneys to stand up to people like Trump. And so if you keep that in mind, at least I try to keep it in mind, and it helps me recalibrate at the end of every day, because this isn't easy, and people like Trump make it harder, but it's people like the rest of us who make sure that justice is done. And don't forget to have fun, because if they take the fun out of life and out of your work, then they've won. So you have to continue to have a life and have fun and do what's important to you.
Absolutely.
Those are words to live by there. Anyways, thank you both, and thank you to Emma Goldman, the one and only daughter of my producer and daughter of Mo Goldman. And I look forward to getting this posted and sharing it widely to the masses. So again, immigration ain't easy. And you can listen to us on any podcast platform. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mo. Talk to you. Take care.
Thanks, Mo. Have a good weekend.